Hi, this is Paul. After the what I thought was quite interesting conversation between Jonathan Peugeot and Rationality Rules, Rationality Rules came out with his Christ Whisperer video. And, maybe he's just paying the rent. Maybe someone who hears me, in fact, I know this is true because I read it in the comment section. Sometimes you watch one of my videos and think, oh, maybe Paul is getting beyond his shallow Christianity. And then you zip over to the church website and there I am shilling Jesus one Sunday after the next. I get that, paying the rent. I understand. But part of what I thought about this morning when I woke up was I want to do a video on a guide to most celebrity atheist videos out there because the format is pretty well known, just like the format for my Sunday sermons is pretty well known, and just wanted to do a little critique of it. Almost all of these videos can be boiled down into something like this. Christians are politically bad. And now Jordan Peterson coming into the mix. Jordan Peterson, this is specifically to the Christ Whisperer video. Jordan Peterson is sympathetic to Christians. He gives aid and comfort to Christians. This is part of the reason Sam Harris wanted to have those conversations with him. Don't be a Christian. Don't be like Jordan Peterson. Now, both of these are basically arguments from pride, appealing to our prideful instincts that you want to be basically status in the group. You want to be like all the other cool kids. So don't be a Christian and don't be like Jordan Peterson. Now, at the heart of many of these arguments is Christians shouldn't be politically influential, especially in the United States, which maybe I'm pulling some of my own tribal privilege cards here, but it is sort of interesting to watch other members of the world or the English-speaking world talk about this and complain about it as if Americans don't complain about their own politics. This is the heart of almost all new atheist grinding. And again, one of the best examples of this was Richard Dawkins on Unbelievable a number of years ago when he very readily ceded ground to the Christian and the Jew in the conversation and basically said, well, you're not like all those other Christians. And, Rationality Rules crying game moment in his video too, when he discovered to his horror that, well, Jonathan Peugeot is a Christian and one of those Christians that believes in God. And if he watched more of Jonathan Peugeot's videos, well, Jonathan Peugeot isn't an American, he's a Canadian, and Jonathan Peugeot has his own political views, and a lot of them basically wouldn't sort of match up with what Rationality Rules thinks are good political views according to his own estimations. But this is something that I find annoying in our present position. I think everybody gets to have religious beliefs and everybody gets to have political beliefs. They might not be right. You might not like them, but everybody is entitled to something. And again, I'm putting my cards on the table as broadly speaking, a Western liberal Christian, if we must use labels, because freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, now part of the way the democracy game works is that you get to go into public and express your political beliefs. And we have things like elections and courts and laws and legislatures. And hopefully we can do a lot more talking, a lot less jailing, and a lot less killing. That's sort of the goal of democracy. And I think, along with many of you, that's worked quite well. And so what that means is we all have to not only put up with political views that we don't like, but we have to put up with a fair amount of political bitching that we don't like to hear. And, well, bitching usually leads to bitching back. And so maybe this video is that. I hope it's more than that. This is also a consequence of a worldview. And again, almost everybody playing in this space is deeply impacted by modern liberalism and our assumptions about what good political processes are. If you like a democracy to one degree or another, you're going to have to tolerate the political views of the rival political factions. That's just the nature of the game. Now, secularity really does sort of focus everything to the political layer. because it's the seculum, it's the 100 years, it's the age of one person's life, it's the water we're swimming in right now. And so politics is prioritized, and actually this habit amongst the celebrity atheists is very much a function of their worldview. Now, I like bringing David Brooks into this conversation at this point, because David Brooks, although he is a political pundit, although he's a political and opinion journalist and kind of a moralist as well, and he's had his own religious journey that has, so brought him into Christianity, but also brought him out of his first marriage and into his second marriage of a Wheaton grad. And almost any moralist book that he writes, go to the Amazon comment sections, and people are very quick to bring that data to the point. He keeps making the point that, worldviews are downstream from, politics are downstream from worldview, and everybody has a worldview. And he says, well, politics in many ways is getting too important in our world. Not everything should be political. Brett and Heather made a similar point. Rod Dreher has made similar points. This is sort of a standard point in the IDW. There are other more important things to life which make life more meaningful than politics, and politics should stay out of them. Politics should be a limited part of our consciousness, a limited part of our conversation, and government should be a limited part of our life. And of course, that is a political argument too. And part of what we're dealing with right now is, in fact, to what degree the state should be involved in different aspects of our life. I grew up mostly voting Democratic for the Democrats. And, you'd hear the Republicans argue about limited government. Well, maybe I'm getting older, I'm getting more conservative, I don't know. But David Brooks' point about there should be limitations to the state, I think is important. And perhaps part of what we've seen in these Enlightenment values that we live out is, limited state and, frankly, in some ways, limited church. Simple church has been a kind of a meme before COVID. Church should do a few things, do them well. And that's also part of my Kuyperian background with Dutch Calvinism, where you have sphere sovereignty. Let the state manage state things. Let the church manage church things. Let the family manage family things. Let there be multiple institutions. Now, again, all of this is seated in a long narrative and is in itself not fundamentally essential. But I think for life in the here and now, it's a pretty good system, and one that's proven itself better than many other systems. And there's a lot of nuance to it, and something that should be preserved. And so in that way, maybe I'm just reflecting my age cohort, because it seems that most of the IDW peeps are about my age. We're born somewhere in the mid-60s, and sort of at the end of the baby boom and right before the Gen Xers, right there on that cusp. Jordan Peterson, the Weinstein brothers, almost all of us born right between Jordan Peterson, 1962, and I think the Weinsteins getting towards maybe 67 or 68. That seems, this demographic cohort is now expressing itself now that we're into our 50s. And again, there's a long 50s are sort of a sweet spot in which you sort of reach the height of your career, of you're not quite knocking on the door of senility, but you've had enough experience to see a few things. So again, it's no surprise that a bunch of us now in our mid-50s are sort of exerting ourselves on larger stages. And again, what we're talking about are broadly Enlightenment values, and I actually don't think there's necessarily a lot of disagreement between most of the celebrity atheists and the kinds of stuff I'm trotting out here. Now, Religion S, which is sort of this post-secular view of what a religion is. Of course, Tom Holland's been barking at that door more and more. All of these little Vanderclayisms. There is a list of them on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, and I guess the consequence of doing these videos is I keep coming up with more and more little Vanderclayisms. So barking at the door instead of knocking at the door, fudgy, sloshy. Well, a big part of this whole rationalist game is all falsifiability and the imagination that the world can be somehow distilled down into these little discrete truth nuggets that can be verified via correspondence and yada yada yada. And Esther pushed back on me, not in my video, but in the constant conversation between her and I and Twitter DMs. He says, well, verifiability and not verifiability, but verifiability and correspondence is a part of your system too. And she's right. That's fair. But I think it's more that the world can somehow sort of be broken down into these truth particulates. And then, well, there's a truth particulate, and we can use reason to sort of correspond it to there. Well, truth particulates meets combinatorial explosion, because if you want to break down the world that way, there's just too many of them. And even our ability to fully exhaust one or another is highly limited. And the tiny little discrete truth chunks that we break the world down into don't wind up being terribly useful as the combinatorial explosive nature of the world and values and everything presents itself to us. And so on one hand, the problem with religious people is they get into politics. On the other hand, the problem with religious people is they're pursuing non-secular goals. They're pursuing heaven or trying to avoid hell or trying to please God or some of these things. And so on one hand, Christians, don't be involved in politics. Don't bring your religious ideas into politics. Your non-secular goals, keep them out of politics. And to a degree, they make a point. In many ways, the United States, which was a pioneer in trying to lay some of these things aside as best they could, was an attempt to get away from a lot of the internecine religious political wrangling that was disabling Europe in the wake of the Protestant Reformation. But I think, as Tom Holland has been showing, secular is a Christian product. And this is a very difficult thing for a lot of people to see, that in many ways you won't have a secular world apart from this. Again, this is a product of Christianity. And in this little paper I wrote with the Vervaeke book that will be coming out at some point, when I was writing that chapter, my experience of writing is sort of like my experience of talking at these videos. It's sort of the second secret sister to the church. You lose Christianity and you sort of lose secularity. And I know that would cause fits amongst the atheists, but it's a hard argument to resist when you just look at the timeline and the sources. You're just like, it seems that our Western liberal conception of science is downstream from Christianity. Our Western liberal conception of secularity is downstream from Christianity. Oh, someone at the door. Hang on. Part of what comes into a lot of these things is the idea of don't encourage people to sacrifice secular goods for the sake of the non-secular. That's sort of at the heart of this too. And again, you're expressing sort of the privacy, liberty ideas. And should will always be with you. And so, the part of the problem of what these Christians are doing is they're sacrificing, money, ambition, sexual gratification, all of these things for, heaven. And, they shouldn't do that. Okay, maybe if you do it in private, maybe, be an adult, be on your own. You have liberty to do what you want, but don't encourage other people to do it. That's, in that way, evangelization, as Christians would call it, or proselytization. These are bad things, and people should really stop. People should be left to their own ideas. But evangelization and proselytizing is common to everyone, because you can't make this argument and not do your own proselytizing, because, again, this argument is built on a whole system, a whole worldview. So implicit in this is good people help other people be happy. All right. That's an idea. That's a worldview. That's a value. Bad people lead others astray with offers of non-secular happiness that are unverifiable. They're unfalsifiable. Oh, okay. So you should stop. Well, where are you getting your should from? These things, I mean, you just go round and round and round on a lot of these things. Now, again, implicit in this is often that, well, eternal conscious bliss is a goal. This is sort of what we're heading for. And this is why utilitarianism just kind of keeps seeping up from the bottom in these conversations. It's seldom named because once it actually gets named, its weaknesses will become apparent, and that leaves people open to certain kinds of arguments that aren't all that hard to make. You know, the good in this worldview is as much happiness for as many people as possible, sort of. And the other day, someone on Twitter was going off on something, and so I usually just kind of pause and ask them, well, is this the good? Is the good as much happiness for as many people, as much as possible for as long as possible? Well, yeah. And so if you keep following that out, it's eternal conscious bliss. It's sort of the opposite of eternal conscious torment. But then when you start pressing people on, well, if it makes someone happy, or if it feels tremendously meaningful to spend maybe their short life because they're not eating well or getting any exercise, but their short life playing World of Warcraft all the time. I mean, think about my chat with Topher. So there's Topher 1 and Topher 2. No, there's one Topher, but Topher the Salty. There was episode 1 and episode 2, almost 3 hours of Topher conversation. And just a little aside, as if I needed to ask for that, since my videos are almost all asides. Part of the reason I do these conversations is because what I am trying to do is establish a bit of a community. And so if Topher is one of these people in your neighborhood, as the Sesame Street song said, and so if you go to Bridges of Meaning Discord, you'll find Topher there. And so give him a little bit of celebrity and invest a little bit of celebrity in him. And because I have a high degree of confidence that if you meet Topher and find him, that you'll find him a good conversation partner, and you can learn things from him. So that's part of why I do this. So again, the good in this worldview is as much happiness for as many people as possible, sort of eternal conscious bliss. But what about Brave New World Soma? And again, that's what Brave New World in novel form is dealing with. Well, what if we could sort of lay down and have a drug? And well, that's why part of the reason Jordan Peterson would always bring up cocaine, because cocaine, you maximize bliss. And let's say instead of implicitly defining eternity as in a time frame, you take eternity, because there's really two sides to eternity. One is all time and one is no time. Well, cocaine is in a way no time, and so maybe cocaine with a bullet tracer. Suicide is going up, but most people will shrink back from that and say no. Well, doesn't it make sense? Isn't it rational? Cocaine with a bullet chaser, because you maximize your happiness and then you end your life into the null value void at the end of the world. And shouldn't that be ultimate good? Isn't that eternal conscious bliss? They would say no. Well, why not? Well, because there's something about the video game addict that is, well, it isn't noble for a human being. Well, where are those ideas coming from? And how can we account or address those ideas in our system? Now, it isn't entirely blind to the meaning argument, because meaning won't necessarily keep you from playing video games, because part of the attraction of video games is you create a tiny little world on a tiny little computer screen, and it is in fact meaningful to play Candy Crush or World of Warcraft or Civilization. You know, I construct these little worlds and these little armies and these little kingdoms, and part of why I like Civilization is it's sort of complex, and so you build this whole thing, and with each edition of Civilization, that's my computer game drug of choice. With each successive degree of Civilization, They're always trying to both make the world more complex, but yet keep it being fun. And so all of that is sort of meaning tinkering. It isn't necessarily eternal conscious bliss. It's also a degree of escape, but it's also a degree of meaning chasing. And part of the weakness of the meaning argument is meaning can be found in, helping the homeless person or having a child or torturing people in your internment camp. Meaning is sort of an equal opportunity provider. But meaning, again, is forced to live in this constellation of other goods and things that are really sort of hard for us to get a handle on. This morning I watched the case against Santa denialism on Sisyphus 55. Sisyphus lately has been putting out some fun videos sort of in this corner of the conversation, and he's sharp and he's succinct, all these kinds of things that I am not. And so in this little 8-minute, 50-second video, he sort of lays out I think one of the best case secular sort of agnostic cases for, okay, how are we thinking? And he just rapidly runs through using Santa denialism, so many of the arguments back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it's, it's very well done, and it's a lot of fun. But what you get at is that our quarry here, and sometimes the quarry is, we can't seem to, a Christian would say God in some ways. But our quarry here, we might say the good, the true, and the beautiful, which is sort of a classic approach to it, and not a bad one. Our quarry is complex. I mean, we have difficulty even articulating what we're shooting after. And so often we just catch ourselves in cheap reductions of it. And so, utilitarianism doesn't really get there. Yeah, certainly we want our children to be more happy than miserable. Certainly it's a benevolent thing to want our neighbors to be more happy than miserable. And happiness gets trotted out again and again as, in previous years, it was me and my wife and sons living in the house because I have 5 children. And just sort of the way they lie, it was, sons. And right now it's me and my wife and 2 daughters living in the house, and almost all the TV watching I do with them. And if I want to watch TV with them, it forces me to watch the TV that they're interested in, which often isn't what I'm interested in. But I almost always learn something. So we've been watching The Bachelorette, which maybe I should do a video on my thoughts on The Bachelorette. But again and again, these parents, so it was Meet the Parents week this week. And so the parents come on and they say things. And this is sort of the national ritual. I just want my son to be happy. Can you make my son happy? And again, that's not a bad thing. Parents want this for their children. Parents don't want to see their children suffer. They don't want to see their children miserable. But there's a certain degree of irony for parents saying this, because in the training of their children, if they actually did a decent job raising their children to the degree that their children have at least have hit a certain bar of humanity that they can, and functionality that they can somehow qualify to get through casting to be on The Bachelorette, well, these parents brought a great deal of misery into those little children's lives, because that's what parenting is. It's saying no, and it's clean your plate, and it's clean your room, and it's do your homework, and it's bringing all sorts of suffering into children's lives so that when they grow up, they can have less suffering. It's parenting 101. And so utilitarianism sort of breaks down in that score. And this is well known by this point, which is why you won't have people really come out full-throated utilitarians, because they know that, well, it's pointing to some aspects, but it fails to really frame the entire picture. These are fine people who have made it to celebrity atheist status on YouTube and on bigger stages and in the bookstore. They're not above recommending the marginalization or punishment of people who don't share their worldview agenda. In other words, their utilitarianism sort of only applies to those who deserve it. And, well, people who vote wrong and Christians who trot their religious views into political, as if the utilitarian atheists weren't doing exactly the same thing, somehow deserve punishment or marginalization or censorship or yada, yada, yada. And so now we've basically got in-group and out-group dynamics. Eternal conscious bliss, and so one of the ongoing back and forth things on the Discord server as a function of the high degree of people getting interested in big O orthodoxy and David Bentley Hart and the kinds of books and ideas he likes to write, gets into the question of, well, eternal conscious torment. And Preston Sprinkle's written on this, and so this is something that gets kicked around the server. And every time I hear, it's only been quite recently that I heard hell described as eternal conscious torment. And usually when you first hear something like this, which is quite clever, you sort of have to pause, and something in your intuitive side says, well, that doesn't sound quite right, but your rationalist side hasn't had time to chew on it yet. So, the Consciousness Congress and their subcommittees have to sort of go to work on some of these things. Well, I don't really think hell is eternal conscious torment, and I don't really think heaven is eternal conscious bliss. I think, sort of like utilitarianism, they're sort of pointing to something that's we should pay attention to, but not really. And the relationship between eternal conscious bliss and material existence is well, I don't think it's what hardly any of those celebrity atheists would want it to be. Because again, the most rational thing might be, a huge dose of cocaine followed by a bullet chaser. Boom, maximize bliss, boom, and life out of the world. Mission accomplished. Maybe we should do that to babies right after they're born. Maybe that's a defense against anti-natalism where, okay, maybe we got to get it in the womb too, because maybe they're suffering in the womb, pushing against mommy's womb, and they finally get out and they cry and they come out into this world. Oh, they're about to suffer. Let's inject them with cocaine and then end their life quite quickly. And so when you see these anti-natalism and you see all these arguments, you begin to say, okay, well, what's the telos? What is this world you're really pointing about? What's the great evil? Well, the great evil is suffering, and the great goal is bliss. And, well, these are reliably producible with chemicals. It seems absolutely a materialist argument. This is reliably producible with chemicals. Use cocaine, as Jordan Peterson says. Okay, give them cocaine and kill them before they have a chance to suffer again. It's sort of like, Roman Catholic last rites, or holding baptism off until the end because, well, baptism covers all the sins, and don't let them sin after they get baptized. There have been analogies for these things in theology for a very long time, and people that just sort of dismiss theology, well, you're actually dismissing a source of argumentation and clarification that's been around for a long time. And all of this stuff is sort of built into religious traditions, and people act out religious traditions, which is sort of why the paying attention to the religious frame is sort of like paying attention to the biggest questions living computational system of all of human history. That's one way of thinking about what religious life on earth is like. We're all working through these religious ideas in real time, and it's not just abstract thought and theory and rationality, but it's far deeper because it's both sides of our brains, and we're living it out and we're acting it out, and all of the consequences are being manifest, and some of the consequences are being ducked, and on and on and on and on. And that's what we're doing in this world, at least from one point of view. So not only is it unclear that this is a good goal, again, Mike in our local meetup would, this argument has nothing on him, so now we're injecting babies with cocaine and snuffing out their life right after it. And we all shrink back in horror from that, and rightfully so. But that's sort of a telos or an implication of this worldview. It doesn't hold. It doesn't make sense. They keep promising that someday, well, someday when? Someday we'll be able to deliver this to the masses. Oh, okay, but you're not going to do it with cocaine and bullets. All right. But first of all, we, as John Gray points out, well, that's a wholesale grab from Christianity. The idea that Homo sapiens and human beings are a category that is functional and real in our midst. Well, thank you, Jesus, for giving us that one. So you have the problem of we in there, and none of us will ever get there. Well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean none of us will ever get there? Because I won't get there. I'm already in my mid to late 50s, and at some point I'm going to die. And truth be told, if you look at what we've managed to do in terms of life expectancy, is that, well, people live longer, but in some ways they suffer more. And you might say, well, that's a consequence of Christianity not letting us kill off old people, because maybe the merciful thing would do to be kill off old people. So killing off other people, other old people, that's kind of grim. So let's just at least give people the option to off themselves if life doesn't seem to be living up to its dreams. But again, once you start pushing the suicide thing, they shrink back. Because, as C.S. Lewis noted, as G.K. Chesterton noted, they're smarter than their system affords. Well, what does that mean? It means that they've inherited systems that they're not completely cognizant of, not completely consciousness of, that have more wisdom built into them than they themselves have acquired. And for all of their attempts to install a new operating system into their minds, those attempts have been limited because they naturally shrink back from the cocaine bullet baby scheme. Or from, well, let's just kill all the old people. Because, well, utilitarianism, it isn't blissism. And so suddenly the usefulness to what end? Usefulness to happiness. But again, look at happiness studies. It's a very interesting area. But you learn some things looking at happiness studies. And so Jordan Peterson's rejoinder is, well, meaning sort of trumps happiness. But my rejoinder is meaning is good too, but not meaning alone. Because Jordan Peterson finds it meaningful to complain about other people who find it meaningful to do what they're doing that Jordan Peterson is complaining about. So meaning itself isn't really a perfect gyroscope. Now, you can, let's say, adapt Jordan's system and say, well, if you keep doing what's meaningful, you'll outgrow your wokeness or your neo-Marxist tendencies and, well, maybe that's so. And I think a number of people have discovered that. But seems to be sort of a painful process. There are other things involved. And just like you can't reduce the world to happiness, you can't really reduce the world to meaning too. And this gets to the point that the world is really hard to reduce. And in almost all cases, including in religious ways, when we reduce the world, we find ourselves kind of in a bind. Because the reduction doesn't really finally fully work. A lot of this, and I put up the link to Mabel, which I read not too long ago, where you have this woman who is in a nursing home, and she's been there for 25 years, and she's blind, and she can't smell, and she can't see, but she seems to be encountering a great deal more bliss than maybe even Hugh Hefner was during his life, or Jeff Bezos, or Jeff Bezos' ex-wife giving away $1 billion a month, or this woman seemed ridiculously blissful, and it seemed the path to it was decidedly religious. And so utilitarianism has that weakness. But then again, most of us, when we look at the story of Mabel, what gives the story power is that on one hand, we sort of look at her and say, she shouldn't be happy, but she is. Okay, so religion can do that. But another side of us gets to the point that says, you know what? She shouldn't be blind. Her face shouldn't be eaten by cancer. She shouldn't be abandoned in a crappy nursing home. She deserves better. And she deserves better. She deserves to, well, to what? She deserves to shine like the sun. She deserves to be brimming with health. She deserves, well, does she deserve? Or, see, again, we struggle with these things. And some religious people don't do themselves justice when they don't struggle with these things, to the degree that we wrestle with trying to reduce without the costs of reduction. We're looking for lossless compression, or at least less lossy compression, because all of our compression schemes are tremendously lossy. And we want to understand and boil down the world and see the world better and righter. And so in some ways, again, this idea of eternal conscious bliss is sort of a vague copy of Christian hope. And, part of the reason Tom Holland is so devastating is that he just sort of exposes, as he walks through history, how, the Christian footnotes behind the anti-Christian screeds from the celebrity atheists. But again, I don't think heaven is eternal conscious bliss, just like I don't think hell is, you can reduce hell to eternal conscious torment. It's a very modernist move. Now, back to Rationality Rules' Christ Whisperer video. And by the way, if you would call me a Christ Whisperer, I would be more than happy to accept that label. It's the no true Scotsman argument, which, as Google scrapes Wikipedia, no true Scotsman, or an appeal to purity, is an informal fallacy in which one attempts to protect a universal generalization from counterexamples by changing the definition in an ad hoc fashion to exclude the counterexample. And we all do this, because it's really hard not to, because we're trying to wrangle with broad essentialist categoricals and categorizations. And this seems absolutely necessary to have a productive conversation, but it's almost always subject to very valid critique. And you could play this game all day long, and like many simple games like tic-tac-toe, play it for a while and it gets boring quickly, and so we stop playing the game. Charles Manson was an American. Charles Manson was a murderer. Americans are murderers. And you can play this game in a woke fashion. The story of America is white supremacy. All Americans are white supremacists, or at least all American institutions are white supremacists. Therefore, Barack Obama is a white supremacist leader and president. It just doesn't. It's such a sloppy approach to things that it just loses validity. Now, again, we might ask, well, how does it lose validity, and why does it lose validity? And this is where we get into the moreness and suchness of thinking. And when you're using something like Christianity, it seems like a specific and narrow category, but, over 2 billion people roughly considered Christians in the world. That's a lot of people, far more than Americans. And you've got a massive agent-arena relationship, because the diversity within these groups is just simply enormous. Now, so let's pluck a recent example. I didn't know Alex Jones was one of us, being a Christian. Shucks. There was Jericho March, and go ahead, and Rationality Rules that's a kid in a candy store. At Jericho March, you've got all kinds of folks there. A lot of prominent Christians, a lot of evangelicals. And if you read like Rod Dreher's take on that and the comments to it, yeah, there's some real key connections between the evangelical tradition and a bunch of things there, and Pentecostalism, and but there's also some Jews and some white folks and some pro-Trump people of color and quite a few atheists too, I would imagine. And so the difficulty with this kind of thing is that you can use Jericho March to paint atheists, but they would say, but a lot of this stuff is really Christian-y. Yeah, it is. It's really Christian-y. And this is the kind of things that Christians deal with and try to resolve. Michael Horton in the Gospel Coalition. Michael Horton, conservative Reformed theologian from Westminster West, is written a systematic theology not too long ago. Writes about the cult of Christian Trumpism. And as a Christian Reformed minister, the vast majority of my colleagues, some of whom vote Republican, some of whom vote Democratic, almost all would probably, a lot of whom wouldn't like some of Michael Horton's theology, or his take on women in office, or his take on a whole variety of other social issues. they would very much agree that this is a cult of Christian Trumpism, and this is a heresy, and this is, Donald Trump is not your savior. That slot has been taken, and that slot is Jesus. But again, there's a whole theological matrix in which this stuff is working through. And part of what's helpful about these huge categories that are very, very difficult to come to essentials is that you can actually have a conversation about the essentials, because on one hand, they're enormously broad, but they're well developed enough to get specific on certain things and to actually have a substantive, interesting, important conversation about what is essential to Christianity or being a Christian. That's a very live topic. And it's enormously difficult, but you're actually capable of having an interesting conversation about that. And so it's sort of easy to slide out. Just because you say no true Scotsman doesn't mean we're not susceptible to the fallacy. I think that's the way we are. So doing this historically is just enormously difficult, as many who would kvetch at all sorts of things in Tom Holland's thesis. Yet his thesis gets traction and has a degree of bite. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to buy it, but that's the whole point. The whole fun of argumentation and conversation and debate is, well, it's actually more fun when we can sort of concede points and go back and forth and establish at least enough common ground that we can have some fun with this. So we have to use labels and language in broad ways in order to try to get a handle. Here we're taking a terribly theoretical thing, exaptation, trying to get a grasp, and I could just, in my visible consciousness Congress, I just see John Vervaeke grasping when I use these things. He's colonized me sufficiently and educated me sufficiently to know these things. But this is part of the process. And just like reducing Christianity or atheism, and atheists are only people who don't believe in God. Okay, well, there's a no true Scotsman move too, right? I mean, we're going to use these things to try and have conversations that each of us decide is helpful. And again, the decision about what is a helpful conversation, you're not going to come up with some grand standard for that. We're pattern seeing patterns where people's opinions are going to change on this, and there's going to be a bell curve, and there's going to be a hierarchy, and all of this stuff is going to happen. So instead of acting like it doesn't happen, just let it happen and see if you can swim in those swirly waters. This leads to another one of the points in his video. You shouldn't listen to Jordan Peterson because he gives aid and comfort to the fundies. And of course, the fundamentalists are the big boogeymen here. And well, then you have, I forget who it was that had the question of if they're looking for a cab in London in a cold, rainy night and they see someone with a Bible and a cross hanging in their cab versus, maybe they don't do that in London, I don't know, or New York City, or someone with, Coexist, or someone with, the flying spaghetti monster, which one do you pick? Well, actually, I always comment to my wife that for me as a pastor, sometimes they have these directories of like all Christian institutions. I actually sort of avoid those because someone who so prominently displays a fish or says, I'm a Christian, I won't cheat you, I always kind of pull back and say, well, why do you have to make that point so forcefully? And because I know a lot of Christians who cheat and con, and I know a lot of pastors who do, and I live in the middle of that. And Jordan Peterson's point about a good plumber, when I look for a plumber, I want him to be honest. I want him to be competent. If he's a Christian or not. Now, I know some Christians are very honest and competent plumbers because they're Christians. I know other plumbers who are honest and competent even though they're not Christians. And I think there are probably plumbers out there who use their Christianity as a way to fool customers. I mean, when people trot out the bad behavior of Christians to Christians, they act like it's a revelation. But if you're deep within the tribe, especially as deep as a pastor, Well, you know this already. Not only because every now and then someone will confess their sin, but the vast majority of time, everybody's complaining about others of them. Take a look at Jonathan Haidt's book, The Happiness Hypothesis, what he has to say about gossip, which I put in a sermon recently. So, yeah, it's not a revelation to Christians that Christians use their Christianity for unchristian ends. I think that's human nature. When we see an opportunity or a way that we can gain advantage or a competitive advantage, we do. And so I'd be not at all surprised to see atheists doing the same thing. It's simply human. But again, the patterns of this recently are so predictable. Gays and women with unwanted pregnancies are always trotted out as the oppressed people who lack eternal conscious bliss, and so that warrants political priority. Okay, it's the nature of politics to prioritize something. There's always a cause. Is it going to be the Uyghurs in China? Is it going to be the Armenian genocide? Is it going to be the Palestinians or the Jews or the Christians or the Muslims or the women or the gays? Or history has no lack of people lacking eternal conscious bliss. I think it's everyone. How do we have a hierarchy? How do we prioritize? Well, there's a conversation. Fundamentalist Christians are trotted out as the group who oppresses them. Okay. So be it. It's lots of people oppressing lots of people. And I was just having a talk with someone, and we'll see if he agrees to release the conversation, because it was a powerful conversation. The most important the video that Jordan Peterson hooked him was I'm oppressed, you're oppressed, everyone's oppressed. We're also all oppressors. We're all perpetrators and oppressed, both at the same time. We're involved in this. Okay, eternal conscious bliss. Well, the cocaine chase, the cocaine solution and the bullet chaser. No, that doesn't get at it. No, it shouldn't get at it. Life is precious. Suicide is a bad idea. Don't do it. Fundamentalist Christians, yeah, they've got their tally sheet just like everyone else. And, okay, now a point of Christianity acknowledges this idea. Christians, at least from my perspective, should be the first to stand up and say, sort of like the possibly apocryphal G.K. Chesterton idea, what's the matter with the world? I am. To be a Christian is to acknowledge that you are an oppressor. And in fact, to at some point say, I am going to prioritize the fact that I am oppressor beyond the fact that I am a victim. And in fact, by paying attention to that, instead of paying attention to my victimhood, because again, it's not exactly a broad, brilliant stroke of revelation to say that self-pity is a bad idea and doesn't really lead to eternal conscious bliss, nor to even more common varieties of happiness. But embracing one's sinfulness and confessing one's sins, well, maybe this is just downstream of Christianity, and maybe if, like Nietzsche and certain other characters, we would shed all of these things and stop doing that and live into the brilliance of our self-regard. Again, it just doesn't wash in our culture. Why? Because we're swimming in Christian waters. Is it pure Christianity? No. Is it polluted? Yes. Do we do it wrong? Almost all the time. What can we learn from these dynamics? Jordan Peterson, well, nice should be at the top of his hierarchy, because isn't nice the creator of eternal conscious bliss? No, it doesn't work. And we all know that. There's Michigan nice. Well, what is Michigan nice? Well, talk to someone from Michigan. Sometimes it's called Minnesota nice. It can be Canadian nice. It can be American nice. At least from New York and New Jersey, we were less nice. That's kind of the way we were. So Jordan Peterson expressed sympathy for the conscious discomfort of those in modernity. How dare you, sir, be kind towards this out group? Don't be a Jordan Peterson. Give me a break. the scientific problem to suffering doesn't really work. Just like, and I think of, I forget her name in the Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory movie, which was just tremendous. These little morality plays. I want a golden chicken, Papa. Buy me a golden goose, a goose who lays golden eggs. Buy it for me. I want it now. Conscious suffering works, well, and we all know this. She was suffering at that point. Is her suffering deniable? But you say her suffering is valid. And Sevilla and her Persig videos haunt this conversation because the Achilles heel of the scientific image is value. And so for all of those who sort of cover one eye and use the scientific image to try to create value out of the world, Persig stumps in and says, yeah, but look at what you're doing. Doing this just highlights the fact that you're seeking value. Seems to be the most obvious thing, but it's not necessarily obvious if this is just the way you live or try to live all the time. Once you exclude value in order to what? Achieve value, you've placed value at the top of the hierarchy. Value is, again, one of these things that, when I listened to the introduction that Sevilla gives in that second commentary on Jonathan Peugeot and Adam Friended, very good kind of laying out of a metaphysics of value, and it's a compelling case in many ways, and has a lot to be said for it. Now, exactly how a metaphysical frame, and I want to get into more videos that relate frame and religion, because again, they're not exactly the same thing. And we're using frame and that model to try to learn something. But again, all models are necessary. All models are limited. That's the nature of our ability to see the world. We are too small. We can't grasp it all. And if you know this, you have to decide, well, how then should you live? There's a dogma. The world is too big. We are too small. We are limited. I think it's a very true dogma. I think it's a good dogma to live by. Does that mean you can't know anything? No. Does that mean you will know everything? No. Do you find that dogma to be a Christian dogma? Do you find that dogma to be accessible to science? A lot of scientists are saying it. Seems a reasonable thing to say. Dogma can be helpful. So like just happiness or eternal conscious bliss is an unwise ultimate good, suffering or eternal conscious torment is an unwise ultimate evil. And in my conversation with Poe about, Ivan's very sharp man, and the power of the images that Dostoevsky can conjure through Ivan are very powerful. But you can take eternal conscious bliss and eternal conscious torment, and you have that child beating its breast. Well, to me, when I read Ivan, it just shows me the power and the complexity of these questions. But I don't think either ECB, eternal conscious bliss, or ECT, eternal conscious torment, really sort of captures everything, because a spoiled brat is almost always unhappy. And, well, we're going to have some standpoint epistemology here. Oh, okay, so spoiled bratness is now an identity, and so you should listen to the spoiled brats of the world. What do they say? Well, the solution is give me more. All right, well, being an alcoholic is a standpoint epistemology. You should listen to the alcoholic. What do they say? The answer is more alcohol. Now, most of us can step back and say, I don't think so. And most of us would say it would be irresponsible to just cave into the standpoint epistemology of the brat identity. We say the world is larger than this. And in fact, if your parents, when you were younger, gave you more suffering, you would be better. And we know that. But at the same time, we won't say parents should always try to make their children suffer. Then you sort of fall into Ivan Karamazov's vision of the suffering of children. And so we sort of go back and forth with these things. Suffering is notoriously unscientific. C.S. Lewis, you can't do simple math with suffering. One suffering person plus another suffering person equals this. Consciousness is notoriously resistant to this sort of particulate reduction of the universe and playing little accounting games with the particles. Now, again, someone might measure chemical levels in the brain and all of this, but you run right into the hard problem then, the hard problem of consciousness. Suffering is individualistic. It's difficult to measure, and we almost immediately jump to, is that justifiable suffering? So somehow making fundamentalists suffer is justifiable, but allowing gays and women who want to end their pregnancy as quickly and easily as possible, making them suffer a little bit, well, that's unjustifiable. Okay, we're right back in the middle of value. You're not getting away from it. You've just created a value hierarchy. You want to justify it with argument. Sounds like fun. Let's have a conversation about it. And I'm sure I'll be exposed to be using some fallacious thinking. I guarantee I will. I guarantee I am. Why? That's actually a function of my worldview, that I get lots of stuff wrong. I am morally compromised. I am mentally compromised. Let's make a clip of this. I am far more ignorant than I know. I am not as well read as I should be. I am not as good a Christian as I should be. All of that is true for me, and that's a function of my worldview. But now, knowing this doesn't mean, oh, I know this now. No, knowing it, if you really know it, it actually creates humility, which should lead me to listen to the arguments of my rivals and enemies. It's what the book of Proverbs says. We're really talking about what sorts of suffering are justifiable. Bang, you're right in the middle of a value hierarchy, and which are not. And who we are justified in giving pain to, and whose and which pain we ought to alleviate. We've got a dreaded hierarchy going on here, and we're not going to get rid of it just because we say we don't like hierarchies. All right. How do you feel about air? You're not going to avoid that either. Now, in all fairness, Christians return the favor. So it's a little game that we play. And if you pay attention to YouTube, it's a game that gets a lot of clicks. And now that I've monetized clicks, I get a sense of, yeah, clicks make money. And so put clicks, and, sometimes people will pay 30, 40, 50 bucks a pop if a couple of people or three people are really good at this game to watch them do it. Well, what are they really looking for? Well, on one hand, they're looking for their adversaries to be owned. They're going to cheer. So it's a game, and it's not a bad game necessarily. It can be a fun game, but Christians play it too. Communism was atheistic, to a pretty significant degree, and it's a pretty core value in that system. Communists killed lots of people. Yeah, they certainly did. You regularly hear people say, people again trotting out communism, and it's like, well, communism hasn't been tried. Well, Christianity hasn't been tried. Well, utilitarianism hasn't been tried. Well, science hasn't been tried. Oh, okay. Sam Atheist is an atheist. Sam Harris is an atheist. Sam Harris's belief system is responsible for the cruel death of millions of people. But Sam Harris isn't a communist. And Sam Harris isn't responsible for the death of millions of people. And Sam Harris seems to, in many ways, in the sort of secular humanist, downstream from Christianity way, basically, as I've said many times before, and many others have said it, uses Christian values against Christianity. Fair enough. And actually, if you're a Christian, if you can work through the details of that, he's blessing us. He's making us better. So have a conversation with Sam Harris. Get a little upset. Get a little triggered. Cheer for your team. It's a sporting event. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe along the way you'll learn something. Maybe you'll learn more watching Sam and Jordan go at it than you will watching the Raiders and the Rams go at it. Okay, but you'll learn other things from the Raiders and the Rams. Christians return the favor, and back and forth we go, and maybe, just maybe, we'll learn something. What we're really trying to do is have a better conversation, and I want to, really give credit to Justin Brierley, because Justin's been doing this for a long time. And Justin does it particularly well. Now, Justin does it a little differently than others do, but Justin hosts this program and brings people together and tries to help them have better conversations. So Justin Brierly and Jonathan Haidt were IDW before there was an IDW in some ways. But Justin, of course, is a committed conservative Christian and has those conversations. And then, of course, the IDW protocol came around, and that's another nice new idea. And we have straw manning and steel manning, and these are all good practices. But again, just like saying, I'm a sinner, embracing the doctrine of total depravity doesn't mean that somehow I'm no longer susceptible to it. Or having a whole list of playing cards about fallacies doesn't mean that I don't commit them. Or on and on and on and on and on. We want the good, the true, and the beautiful. And even that trio of words, which is classical and durable and really sort of gets at it, well, maybe if I do it in Greek, it's a little bit better. Or we're all struggling to get at this. It's plenty fudgy. Again, fudgy is sort of sneaking an agenda in to try and, it's to try and get the correct. I probably heard this word first when I was in high school chemistry, and we were warned about fudging. Well, what is fudging? Well, fudge means that we kind of figure out what the answer should be, and we have the starting place, and so we can't really do the math, and so we sort of cheat along the way to get the outcome you want. And, of course, the smart chemistry professor will take a look, show your work, kind of show the work, and that's fudgy. Well, multiple choice tests are inherently fudgy because, okay, one answer is probably really wrong. Other answers are a little bit closer. I don't actually have to be able to arrive at the answer correctly, which is actually the goal of education. I just have to get fudgy enough to grab the proper one and maybe make a good guesstimate. So maybe I'll get 50% on the test, even if I do it blindly. We have much in common between us, living. Our context, our culture delivers so much to us that, again, that sort of modulates all of these answers. And C.S. Lewis's observation that in looking back over fights in the past, noticing how much in common the people had with each other, even within their own adversaries, things that they had in common that we don't, things that are obvious to us about them that weren't obvious to each other about the rival parties. It's the way this stuff goes. So we shouldn't waste each other's time or trigger each other needlessly. If we're going in for a sporting event, let's enjoy the sporting event. But let's follow the rules and fight fair. And again, watch an NFL game and, there's grabbing on jerseys and there's holding and they're always trying to get away with stuff. And that's sort of the way we are as human beings. But let's have a clean fight and see what we can do. And it's actually a lot more fun if we're able to concede points and say, yeah, I think you're right. I think that's a devastating argument. I'm still a Christian because you know what? Because all of this stuff is built around it. And maybe I'll flip. Maybe, boy, wouldn't that be not really because I'm not that big, but wouldn't that be a cherry if Paul decided to denounce the faith? Or then again, within Christians, you have all that. If Paul decided to bend his knee to Rome, or if Paul decided to, cut the kvetching Paul and just become Orthodox already, or Paul became the Pope of the Christian Reformed Church. Christian Reformed Church doesn't have Pope. But, that's a little tribal game and it's fun. But see the game for what it is. Enjoy it for what it is. Basketball is fun. Baseball is fun. Football is fun. Card playing is fun. Chess playing is fun. Debating is fun. And, if you come to our local meetup, I've got someone for you to meet because he will debate you endlessly. And he doesn't really care which position he has. He just likes doing it. And that's what he does. But at some point, you also, when you see that as a game, say, I want to do something else. And we're dealing with suffering. And John Vervaeke, his take on Buddhism, I found quite interesting in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. But, John provides a really nice vocabulary for a lot of this. Jordan Peterson sort of comes out with, suffering is the one thing that you sort of can't dispel. And that's a powerful point. But then to say that all life is suffering, well, John Vervaeke in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, I didn't dig down into which episode it was, kind of takes that on and says, well, that's not exactly true. And Vervaeke is right. There's glory and there's pleasure and there's suffering. And we all sort of know that to pursue the good and the right and the holy involves suffering. And in fact, I often tell people, you very seldom go to the movie theater to sit there and watch a movie in which everyone gets exactly what they want continuously. It'd be a very boring movie. What do we want? We want to go to a movie in which there's a trial and there's suffering and there's something to overcome that's deeply meaningful. And I think about Jordan Peterson telling his young son who is scared by the stuff in the movie, keep your eyes on the hero. That's deeply meaningful. And yeah, once you look at those frames and put them out and say, oh, these are psychological and yeah, but we still don't get rid of them. And if you watch the Sisyphus video again, the case against Santa denialism, that's sort of where he ends up. It says, well, even after you do all the philosophy, and this is where worldviews eventually emerge, even after you do all the philosophy, well, life is about the drama and the experience of it and the show and the and the enjoyment of it and the glory that's in it. And now, he doesn't really come out with a Christian answer, and so Christians might say, oh, well, by my tribal scales, I don't really like that, but okay, he isn't a Christian. Why expect him to be one? It's an interesting answer, and he does a really credible job in the video, so enjoy the video, or maybe you won't. Don't watch it if you don't want to. So is all life suffering? Not really, but is suffering sort of a non-deniable thing of life? Yeah, that too. And again, the world is complex like that. Is avoidance of suffering the ultimate good? No, it really isn't. Because, well, what does that mean for the age to come? Well, there's all these evocative images of wiping away every tear. Well, does that mean we won't strive and there won't be challenges, and there won't be adventure, and there won't be the kinds of suffering necessary to have those things? I don't know. Well, then what about your heaven, Paul? Well, I'm not in charge of it. Well, then why do you think it won't get boring, or why do you think it can be good? Well, because I kind of trust the one that I think is writing it. Well, why would you think that? Well, because he made a drama in which the Son of God hangs on a cross and becomes the victim of his enemies. That's one heck of a drama. We can't seem to shake it. And attempts by other attempts to say, well, he wasn't really God, or he didn't really suffer, or God wouldn't let one of his own suffer, or all of those to me just diminish the story. And so, well, if that's the story writer that, leads me into the next story, I'm with him. That's the story writer. That's the one I want writing my story. Now, saying that both engages the adventure and gives me a degree of shivers, because I see the kinds of stories he writes in the suffering of people's lives. I see the kind of suffering he writes into Mabel and into Christians who suffered and some who seem to suffer needlessly. And yeah, this world is full of suffering. Well, is God writing those stories? Well, I thought God was good. And yeah, those are hard questions. And, I can take a go at it right now, but my answers won't dispel these questions. Not like, well, you can split water into hydrogen and oxygen with electricity. Well, that's a good thing. And that's a true thing. But this kind of thing we're talking about is way, way, way more important and more complex than that other question. So, yeah. So then we try and get better answers to it. And again, a lot of what John did in that series I thought was really helpful. Reciprocal narrowing and reciprocal broadening. To me, those seem to be better categories than eternal conscious torment or eternal conscious bliss. Because what I really want is reciprocal broadening. I want my agency to grow. And I want not only freedom from, but freedom to. And I want, instead of realizing when my agency grows, this is what happens when you become a parent. Suddenly you realize you have enormous agency over the destiny of another human being. And now, just by virtue of being that creature's parent, whether you choose to give that child away and have someone else raise him, or raise that child yourself, whatever degree of attention or neglect is going to have consequences in that person's life that they are going to live out for the rest of their natural born days. That's responsibility. That's agency. And then very quickly we realize, I am not up to this agency. I am going to make mistakes. Yeah, I am. And what do I want? Well, maybe I want to hold back on some of the agency, and maybe I want to live up to the agency that I already possess. And maybe I want God to help me through this process. And okay, so Christians want to have an argument about, well, what kind of process is going to be on the other side of the grave in this world? Is there going to be a purgatory? Are we magically transformed? Those are fun theological questions to answer, and they're difficult questions. And well, can we derive this based on Scripture? Or if we add these other Catholic books to the Old Testament, the Greek Old Testament, and include some of those books, can we get a biblical justification of purgatory? And? Why are we still talking about this? Well, because there's something fun about this conversation, and it's meaningful and it's significant, at least to some. And so not everybody's talking about it, but now that I mentioned it, some of you, your ears are going to perk up and you're going to say, well, what did Paul mention there? Well, I want to learn more about that. I want to know more about that, because on one hand, I believe that God is trustworthy and that my life will continue on beyond the grave. And, well, maybe I'm a little anxious about that. Well, if you're anxious about what God will do with you beyond the grave, I understand that. We're all anxious about what God does with us on this side of the grave. And if God is the author, well, and we look at parts of this story that are really dark and painful, and we think, well, what kind of story are you writing? And Christianity, the great puzzle, sort of says, well, it's not just simply determinism. That this authorship metaphor is a metaphor, and it's an analogy, and it affords certain kinds of knowledge, but it doesn't afford the full thing. Because if you can actually fully capture something in an analogy, it's no longer an analogy, it's the thing itself. But again, going back to the other dogma, we're too small to see the thing itself. So what do we want? Well, we want analogies. We want things that are our size. We're not used to, we're children, are not quite ready for the power tools. And so mommy and daddy and Santa gives us a gift, and there's, little power tools that we can sort of cut, and we're not going to cut our fingers off. But if it's just too safe and too small and too dumbed down and too toyish, well, then there's not adventure in it. And this world seems to provide a large degree of glory and pain and suffering, and on and on and on. There's more. There's more. It always takes me a while to fully absorb the fancy Vervaeke words. There's suchness and moreness going on, and that's a good thing. So, is this my last slide? No. We need to be a little bit anti-fragile, and I get triggered. And I watch a video and it triggers me, and then I think, I'm going to make a video right away. I'm going to bionic mosquito. you might like the vengeful, angry culture warrior Paul, but I've got to live with him, and I've got to be him. And the going after rationality rules Paul has to live with the Paul that sees rationality rules as a human being, and the Paul who wants to trap rationality rules in Christianity, and the Paul who wants to befriend rationality rules just because he's different. And in some ways, some of what's going on at the not all, because I didn't start the Bridges of Meaning Discord. Joey and Rick and Job and Jeff, and Cord, I believe, made this diagram, which is sort of like the So we have this bridge scheme. So there's the San Francisco Bridge and the Golden Gate Bridge, but this also sort of looks like an estuary. So there's a lot of me in this whole project. Of course, it's sort of gathered around my video, but what do I want? I want better conversations, and better conversations means be less fragile. I had a conversation yesterday with Scott from Bookwave, and I'll be posting that coming up on the channel. It was a great conversation. I've had so many great conversations lately, some of them online, some of them offline, and I just feel tremendously blessed. But he made the point. I think it was great. What do you need? What do you need to have a good conversation? What do you need? You need patience, empathy, and emotional control. It's a lot of what you need for a good marriage or a good relationship, or there's a lot of wisdom in that. And yeah, there's fun in the gotcha game. So I don't mind looking at a good takedown video now and then and cheering for my team, or sometimes, if you're a Patriots fan or a Rams fan or a Dallas Cowboys fan, sometimes maybe the great play on the other side of the ball is the one that you say, yeah, hey, I like a great play because it's a great play. I like a strong idea, powerful idea, because it's a strong and powerful idea. I respect it, even if it's gripping, and it just raises the challenge because, well, now there's a real challenger, and if I want to maintain my Christian faith, I'm going to have to deal with that idea. And so part of me is afraid, but part of me wants to rise and defend and engage, and I don't want a weakened version of that idea. I want the full idea. There's the hero in us and the hero's journey. So, but the game can get boring too, because, it's all the same old points. All right. We're talking past each other. We're not understanding each other. We want the truth. We want the good and the true and the beautiful. We want less boring. We want more engaging. We want that which is more meaningful. We want to do something difficult. We want to strive for the better. And so, a lot of bridges of meaning stuff. And, if people look for the estuary, which again, I always resist, estuary is a dynamic. And, I think a lot of the videos lately pointing out, Topher first came in for the randos conversation, and then I, had some time on Monday. So, okay, let's do a deeper dive. And there's always going to be different levels at which people participate. Some of you listen to a video now and then. Some of you listen to every one. Some of you listen to the podcast version. Some of you go to the Discord. Some of you sort of live in the comment section. We've got our Vixen Dixon and the Queen of the Firsties. And some of you write emails and hardly ever weigh into other ones. And all of that is good. It's an ecosystem. It's an estuary. It's a place where we can talk, a place where we can grow, a place where we can change. And yeah, I'm a Christian minister. Do I want more people to become Christians? Yeah, but I also want atheists in the Discord server, and I want because then we can wrestle with the conversation. And what on earth will it mean when Christ returns? And some of you will just roll your eyes. That's never going to happen. Yeah, I get it. We're understanding each other, but I'll let God worry about the things that are on God's agenda, and I'll worry about the things that are on my agenda, and I'll worry about things that are just beyond my capacity, things that I can aim for, things that are meaningful, things that I can own and take advantage of, and I'll do those things. So yeah, we need to be a little bit anti-fragile. We want to have better conversations, and I want better Christian atheist conversations. Because part of what atheists in a deeply Christian culture do is force me to think harder about God. And that's scary because, well, that kind of creativity and exploration is usually the seedbed of heresy. But that's just part of the challenge too. Can I grow more and still stay within the fold of the church? Or how can I have better perspectives on the different the different rooms in the church that the Mere Christianity hallway is connected to. C.S. Lewis's great image from Mere Christianity. How can I live my best life? How can it be now? How can it be forever? All of these things I think we all want. So, yeah. Every celebrity atheist video sort of gets boring. Let's make them better. Let's have Christians make them better. And again, in terms of the vast distributed cognitive system that is real life in this world, it's not just what's on screens, it's what's in church, and it's our in real life interactions, and on and on and on and on and on. So anyway, that's this video. Thank you for watching. Some of you support me on Patreon. Thank you for that. As I've said, I've started a new thing on Patreon where I'm taking these. It's really difficult with the money thing. I always try to work it out, because on one hand, I don't want to have pay to play too much, but for those who are supporting, I want to say thanks in some ways. And so a very small token of it is making a PDF of these PowerPoints and making them for patrons only. And if you, I think $1 a month, I'm on that. So Patreon can either work per video or per month. Boy, if I made it per video, I'd really be raking in the dough. But I have it a month, and it's because I think it's just a little easier for those of you who want to give something to support the channel. And who knows where any of this goes. Rick asked me the other day, he said, well, how's it going with the monetization? And I told him how much. He says, you're not even making minimum wage. I thought, yeah, but again, this is a labor of love. This is sort of ministry. This is sort of my own project, on and on and on and on. And so many of you are supporting me, and I deeply appreciate it. And so the PowerPoints for these are behind the paywall on Patreon. Ta-da! Is Patreon bad? Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe I'll start Subscribe Star too. I don't know. YouTube, now I have the little join button. I don't know what to do with that. And now YouTube says I have super chats. And so on Friday mornings at 10 a.m., I should do a better job at communicating. Friday mornings, 10 a.m., California time. Most Fridays, I do a live stream. And if you really want to engage in that, go into the Discord server. But now super chats are available. We didn't have any last week. That was all right. I did my first super chat the other day. Peugeot was doing a question and answer, and I just wanted to do a super chat because I'd never done one. So, and giving Jonathan Peugeot money is fun. I like that. I like giving Jonathan Peugeot money because I really believe in what he's doing, and it gives me pleasure to give him money. So that's what I do. So if it gives you pleasure to give me money, and it has for many of you, and I don't even know. I mean, I always put those little links to cryptocurrency because some of you are into that, and sometimes people give me money in cryptocurrency. I check it like once a year. It's like, oh, there's money there. And well, that's handy. Money's handy sometimes. So yeah, so if you want to support the channel, if you want to get the PowerPoints for this, be a patron. You can be a patron for $1 a month. And then you'll have access to the PowerPoints. Then maybe in the future, I'll put more stuff back there. I don't know. It's interesting to just play with all of this, which is what I'm doing. And ideally, again, as a Christian, I sort of see that as a real benefit of Christianity, that Christianity affords me a vision that God is trustworthy. And he's in control of my life. And at the same time, I have agency, and I have adventure, and I have drama, and there's real things at stake. And I'm not worried about my life in the age to come, because Jesus is the Son of God. I'm preaching on that this week, and so I'm thinking about that. Jesus is the Son of God, and I'm in his hand, and nothing can separate me from his love. And so I want to bless you. And I'm happy when you bless me. And if you're an atheist, bring your best arguments. That's fun. Don't bring the weak stuff or the boring stuff. That's less fun. But you can still come, because even if you've got the weak and boring arguments, you're a human being, and human beings are, human beings are absolutely incredible. They're image bearers of God. And so, yeah, that's why I do conversations. That's why I do this channel. And those of you who listen to my videos, whether you never give anything or even leave a comment, just listening, subscribing, or even if you're one of those people who stays off YouTube and never subscribes because you don't want YouTube in your life, some of you give to Living Stones Church, and that's a way of supporting me. And if you pay U.S. taxes, if you give to Living Stones Church, you get a tax deduction. Win-win. So thanks for watching. And again, if you never give anything, or if you hate my videos, there's always somebody who clicks thumbs down. It's so funny. Sometimes I'll do a video, there'll be a thumbs down almost right away. It's like, I have an adversary. Woohoo! Isn't it glorious? But that's just me being me. So thanks for watching. And, you know, in this middle of this COVID season, yeah, love one another. Have a Merry Christmas, or a Happy Hanukkah for some of you, or Kwanzaa, or Festivus, or whatever. Enjoy the end of the year. Love your neighbor as yourself. And yeah, thanks for watching.